Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Download with Joe. My name's Lewis, I'm the founder of LMC. As always, here with Joe Amador, founder of Amador Consulting. I'm very excited, similar to last week, to be joined by another industry expert from a slightly different part of the industry. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself and then tease up for our guest
Yeah,
today?
Joe here. We do these. Sometimes we talk about news in the market, but we also have been integrating or having more guests, and I'm really pleased to have a kind of an older friend, Mead Rusert, who runs the controls part of Carrier. Mead, I'll let you do an intro, and then we can get into a little discussion about some of what's happening in the industry.
That's awesome. Great. Joe, thanks for the opportunity. Lewis as well. Appreciate being on today. Obviously, there's always a lot to talk about in this space. This has been our lives for a long time, so we're all passionate
Right.
about it. A little bit about myself. So I lead building technologies at Carrier. And what does that mean? What that means is it's a group of businesses at Carrier that have to do with controls, IoT, energy services, and it's across a collection of brands. So, people may not be aware that automated logic is part of that portfolio. So, automated logic controls, obviously carrier controls, our Abound IoT platform. We recently acquired a business, not too recent now, a couple of years ago, Enlight Software, which focuses on the data center infrastructure management space, and Noresco, a performance contracting energy solutions business. So that group of businesses are what I'm really proud to lead, and it's been great, being able to bring those businesses together at Carrier, because for many years they were kind of separate. We've grown, we've acquired some of these businesses, and now trying to really, we really believe that the sum is greater than the parts, and so that's the mission right now, to bring those together a little bit. So.
Yeah, and not part of your portfolio necessarily, but in Europe, the Weissman acquisition, the climate solutions business of Weissman, that's part of Carrier now too. So just mentioning that for those in Europe,
Carrier's gone through some huge transformation in the last year. If you haven't been watching, so first of all, Carrier, obviously a household name in the air conditioning business.
Right.
Went through a period of acquisition 10, 15 years ago, acquired a lot of fire and security businesses and so forth.
Right.
And then recently, in the last year, a tremendous transformation where we've really refocused the Carrier global business on HVAC and R. So we kind of divested and recently announced divestitures of our fire business, our security businesses, and commercial refrigeration.
Right.
But at the same time, we acquired Weissman, which is a huge player in Europe in the HVAC space, and really positioning Carrier to be kind of a more focused HVAC, kind of higher growth in that segment business, and really focus on the climate solution piece, climate solutions, intelligent climate solutions, energy solutions, and so forth. There's a lot of work to be done there, and that's where we're focused now. So.
Yeah, and one kind of bigger catalyst, and we don't have to talk about this too much at all, but Carrier used to be part of UTC, and there was the elevator business, Otis. I grew up in a small town that had a huge Otis elevator factory. I mean, this is back 20 years ago, so I always kind of knew elevators. I would look at elevators, think like, oh, is that made here where I grew up or not? But there was that. There was the kind of defense contracting business, and there was Carrier, and all three. And I mean, as an outside observer, it seems like a lot of these changes started happening after Carrier became a completely independent, publicly traded entity. But yeah, I think there's a really good story to tell around climate innovation, both for transport refrigeration, so the transit cold business, and then Carrier, the core business, which you're a part of. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite a story. So I've been at Carrier over 30 years. Started as an engineer, a mechanical engineer, so I'm still recovering from that. I've done a lot of different things at Carrier. That's what's great about being a part of a bigger company. I've done pretty much every role at Carrier, and interesting, since the spin from UTC, I guess it was 4 years ago now, really unlocked a lot of opportunity for the core businesses. And I think this is just sort of the next progression on that journey.
Yep. So. Well, I mean, one big topic, it's funny, I used to work years ago at Johnson Controls, and we talk a lot about smart buildings. I mean, obviously I talk a lot about smart buildings because that's to some degree the industry I'm in. But maybe we just talk a little bit about the role of technology. And the reason I tee it up that way is there's always been a lot of technology in buildings. I think some of you with 30 years at Carrier, there was technology in buildings at the kind of advent of direct digital controls, which is not the past 5 years, past 10 years. I mean, it's a much longer story. Obviously, there's a lot more modern technology. Maybe a little bit on just you have a portfolio that includes legacy controls businesses, and I say legacy just because we've had controls in buildings for decades. And then the other side of it is Abound, an IoT platform. I'd just be interested in kind of thoughts on bringing all of that together. And then next we can talk about kind of the impact on the operators on broadly decarbonization.
Sure. Yeah. I think, again, this is part of the journey is we've been on this intelligent building message for a long time in the industry.
Yeah.
I think the change now is in the last several years is now becoming a reality. The technology is kind of caught up to the point where it can be real. And as we think about our portfolio of building technologies at Carrier, the way I think about it and the way we're thinking more and more about it is kind of thinking about it in terms of two core platforms. One being the intelligent building platform, which includes equipment level controls, classic building automation, the IoT layer, which complements that, analytics and software, that all together kind of you can bring together into sort of solutions and outcomes-based solutions.
Yeah.
The other platform is our energy solutions kind of growth platform. You think of that in terms of energy services, utility engagements, and so forth. You bring them both together, and now you can get into things like intelligent grid, right? And which is sort of the next horizon. So kind of moving from equipment to systems and buildings and portfolios of buildings.
Yeah.
To energy components to intelligent grid. It's all sort of coming together.
It's maybe not a perfect dichotomy, but you could say more orientation to behind the grid in the first side and maybe some behind the grid, but really also looking in front of the grid on the second solution category. That's interesting because historically, I mean, I remember 10, 15 years ago, there were companies that, if you're looking in retrospect, they almost made the decision, do we want to sell to the buildings or do we want to sell to the utilities?
Right.
And very different sales models.
Right.
I mean, these are startups where they have fewer resources. So you have to pick one or the other. And you had companies like First Fuel and Retro Efficiency, which both of those have been acquired now, but they were really focused. They ended up focusing on, we're going to sell to the utility, kind of like an O-Power does. And then there were a lot of other companies that said, no, we're going to sell to the building owner. Now, obviously at Carrier, you don't have to pick one or the other, but I do agree unlocking both sides in an integrated and maybe holistic way is important, because you could, for example, and I'd be interested in what you think about this, but there's a lot of demand response or just demand flexibility revenue that an individual building might be able to earn that would improve the economics of deploying smart building technology in the building.
Absolutely. That's kind of what we're seeing as well is, if we can kind of unlock the network effects of demand response and so forth and kind of help that along for our customers.
Yeah.
Turn their buildings into an asset, that gives them a little more budget to spend money to upgrade other parts of their building. We think that's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah.
Question?
Oh, go ahead, Lewis. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just on that, with some of the changes that we've seen, and this is why we wanted to get you on the show, because there had been some M&A updates from Carrier over the last 12 months. Are you seeing, because of that and some of the different initiatives that you've got internally, that's changing how you almost adopt technology and also how your customers are adopting your technology?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, there's been, if I think of a little bit longer way than just the last 12 months, because there's been a lot of work in the last 12 months when these big mega deals, kind of put those aside.
Yeah.
I think from a technology perspective, where more of the action is on the smaller investments. It's the classic model of making smaller bets in a much earlier stage. And, one of the benefits, when we moved out of UTC, Carrier launched a venture fund, Carrier Ventures, which has been a fantastic tool for us, because previous to that, our choices were either outright acquisition or maybe do a JV, neither
Yeah.
of which are really good mechanisms for these types of early stage startups. So
Yeah.
now we have a mechanism, and we've done a number of these kind of smaller investments, which have, the way we've been approaching it is where they're most effective, I think, is when we're already working with someone,
Right.
or the technology we actually need to further our mission, right? And they're complementary. It becomes a very natural act to them
Yeah.
partner with them, put a little money in, help
Yeah.
them grow, help them be successful.
Yeah.
When it's force fit, it hasn't been quite as successful. But I think
Yeah.
those partnerships, where we start sort of a partnership model and grow, they become accelerators
Right.
for us, and that's how we view
Right.
it. They really help
Right.
accelerate our journey and where we're going.
Right. And building on that, it makes perfect sense when you think about, there's plenty of work I do, or just when you go to an event, there's a lot of people who really understand building technology, really understand opportunities. Sometimes you could say startups where they have a core technology offering, but the complexity sometimes comes into the market on the channels side. And how do you reach customers? What are all the channels? And I was just going to say, Carrier, you really have a diversified mix of channels to market, right? You make products, you deliver those products, you can come and service the equipment, the products that are out in the field. You have a very large list of third parties that distribute your gear or your products, that install your products. And then you have, for example, the Noresco business that isn't necessarily coming and saying, hey, do you need an upgrade of your control system? I mean, that may be part of it, but it's more, how can we help you decarbonize your buildings? So I'd imagine on one hand, you're probably getting a lot of inbound of just, we've discovered a new business. It's really helpful. It's naturally a fit because this branch or this office is starting to use that technology. And then you can say, hey, we can help you with how to get this into market. Not necessarily the force feeding, which I think is a good analogy, more just there's a natural approach here.
Right. And those, like I said, those natural opportunities tend to work really well. And we do get a lot of the incomings. I do think what startups do a really good job of is like a really focused, point solution, kind of narrow but deep.
Right.
And look, as part of being a bigger company, believe it or not, we're really busy too, just like a small startup. We're just busy doing different things. We're like an inch deep, but like a mile wide. In fact, doing a lot of different things, bouncing a lot of things in the air. So I think the startups can focus a little bit more on a very specific thing and get really good at it. And those areas that maybe we've overlooked or hadn't seen in the past, it really helps. Kind of the ecosystem.
Kind of on the technology piece, I'd be interested in any thoughts you have on. I think I've come to think about technology as an augmenter or an augmentation tool for people versus people are not in the equation. And I think you could take that in different ways. When you talk to somebody like a property manager at a building, a very nice building in downtown New York or SF or Chicago, they say, part of what we offer is there's people who can help you get the most out of your workspace. And again, like that's a very high general term, but you probably want people in the building. You could say the same is true on the maintenance side, or we're fixing equipment, we're fixing things. And I think there were some approaches earlier where, the building's autonomous, you don't need people. And I think there's going to be a lot of debate. Is that the right move or not? But with Carrier, you have a lot of touch points across the building life cycle. I would just be interested in your thoughts on how the technology can augment, if you think it's true, like we want the technology to augment people. It doesn't always have to be a Carrier employee versus complete automation, where you maybe in the future don't have that many people. Go ahead.
This is a big topic, obviously, and it's going to keep evolving. And with labor shortages of technical talent, we've all heard the stories of the labor crisis and so forth. The technical talent, people are retiring. It is real, and it's a very real deal. And there's sort of these views of complete autonomous control. I think the right mix, at least for the near term, is more like adaptive cruise control in a car. To use that analogy, I do think having a person in the middle is important. Especially at this stage of the technology. I'm sure there'll be a time and a place when things are fully automated. And even today, there's applications where things can be fully automated. But
Yeah.
I think the idea of using these tools to augment and make the people that are there more efficient and simple and intuitive to use is where the magic's going to be. These
Right.
tools need to be simple, intuitive. You can easily grasp them and use them out of the box.
Yeah.
I think those types of things will be a huge asset to people going forward. I mean, a good example. I don't know if it's a
Yeah.
good
No,
example.
examples are great. Yeah, please.
Example, like a real life example. So, I'm helping my daughter do her math. Right?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
gets stuck in a problem. She's like, "Don't worry." She pulls out Photo Math. If you haven't heard of it, it's an app on your phone.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
scans a
My kids are younger,
picture.
so I haven't gotten there
Yeah,
yet. But
scans a
yeah.
picture. Well, you're gonna get used to it. Scan
Yeah.
a picture of the actual math problem, and it solves it in real time. It like literally
Yeah.
goes through step by step. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we need to be bringing into our businesses as well to
Right.
help the people do the things that they otherwise may not know how to do, or to do it
Yeah.
faster, easier, more reliably, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What I will say on that topic is I've certainly seen, and maybe I touch more smaller companies, the investors, the capital allocators that are putting money to work in this market. But I also, work with, and we know each other. So it's not like I have no perspective on the bigger company side. I definitely think there's been a little more of an unpacking of, okay, so the goal is augment labor. There's a labor shortage. There's commitments the building operators and owners are making to decarbonize assets. What does that mean? And you could look at a growth in what I would describe as kind of middleware products. Middleware sometimes is kind of a dirty word, but I think you probably have seen it too, Mead. But when I was at JCI 12, 15 years ago, a big challenge was onboarding buildings, and just you have a control system. It might have been a JCI control system, but maybe it's a very old vintage of Metasys in that case. Is very, or maybe the installer of that product didn't name anything. The points didn't name them in a logical way, and so there's a lot of tools that just solving that has huge impact. Whereas I would have argued 10 years ago, a lot of people who might have said, "Hey, we want to support what you're doing. They would have said, "I don't really even understand this problem, let alone how do I wrap my head around the opportunity." I don't think that was ever a problem at Carrier, for example. But you might not have gotten the chance to see a business actually kind of deploying, and because they would have never been able to get over the hurdle of just technically this works.
Right. And that is what you just hit is probably the biggest constraint, if you will, from this whole move to technology, because you need to have good, solid data models and everything you do before AI or any of these tools work.
Right.
And so we all remember the days, we all know even today, in building automation, to do a project like this, the first step is to get the data, normalize it, tag it properly. And that's a big undertaking today. Even with the tools that so-called automated, it's still a big undertaking to do it right. So there's still a lot more work to do in that area, I think. And I think, as we go forward in the industry, I think moving towards some, more industry standards, coming up with some tools to make that easier to do is going to be
and I think there's still more work to be done. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to an investor looking at a company generally in the middleware space, and they were just asking me, it was just kind of a quick call, and they said, what do you think? Can we bounce some ideas off of you? And one of the things that stood out to me was that when I asked them, well, what's the cost? Because obviously the cost will impact what's your revenue projections in the future. And the costs just didn't, I had seen this previously, but the cost just didn't really make sense. So then the challenge was not, do you want to automate some of the onboarding pieces of getting your data into the cloud and deploying smart technologies? The challenge, I think, that I told this investor was just, I don't know that it's going to be a viable business opportunity, given that if it's more expensive than having a person do it manually, yes, it's a little quicker, but, and I think they were kind of thought like, oh yeah, we never thought, and the investor was sophisticated, but it was just, the costs of everything and kind of breaking down, well, what does this cost? What is the current state of doing it versus a technology solution? I think there's a bit of a challenge where sometimes you can offer a better option, but if you charge a lot more for it, that's especially going to be difficult, I think, in our industry.
It's a
So
huge problem, and that's getting back to the startup discussion. When
yeah,
people come to me or to us and with ideas, they always have great technology ideas.
yeah,
The
yeah,
go-to-market and the channel piece is usually where they fall down, particularly in this
right,
industry because it's a really slow industry.
yeah,
But the math usually goes like, and the classic example is chiller optimization.
yes, yeah,
A startup will come to me and say, "Well, it's obvious everybody should do chiller optimization," and I agree.
yeah, yeah,
And I ask them, "What's your business model?" And they always say, "We've done this total addressable market. There's X thousand chillers out there.
right,
If we'd
right,
save 10% on energy in all of them, that's $1 billion or some crazy
right,
number.
right,
And we should get half of that money should be ours because
yeah,
we have the technology. So we're a $5 billion company. And it doesn't work that way
yeah,
because,
yeah,
to get things in the market, to get to the customers, to train them, and so forth, it's a slog.
yeah,
And it really has to be a win-win between the end user, the contractors,
yeah,
potentially the distributors,
yeah,
the company, the OEM like Carrier, the startup.
yeah.
And you really map those pieces out and really think through them. How to get something to market, it's quite complex.
Yeah, yeah. And you touched on another point, kind of that I've seen also that without saying it, but just the willingness to pay. I think that there are cases where, and I've talked to people who have done some deeper analyses. I mean, sometimes I'll do a willingness to pay analysis, but there's to some degree, I think for those who are, I think have a very good sense of what is the willingness to pay, even if you wouldn't like put a number on it in all cases. But I think a bit of the challenge when it comes to something like chiller optimization, I think the actual willingness to pay is lower than maybe what an innovator might think,
Right.
and
100%.
that can be a challenge. And some of that is I'm interested in your maybe like ad hoc list, but it can take longer to deploy. So expectations, there's typically a model there. So being able to model out what's the right way to optimize this chiller or the chiller plant. I've definitely heard stories where it took 9 months to get enough data in enough scenarios. Maybe it was a kind of a non-standard operating pattern. Maybe weather in that location was not as defined. I mean, it was just you had a lot of days where it's hot when it shouldn't have been hot, or I mean, the climate's changing more generally, so maybe that's a bigger issue generally. But it just yes, we could deliver value, but man, we told the client it would be 2 or 3 months, and 6 months later, we don't have a lot of value to deliver. And that's obviously going to hit the willingness to pay in a negative way. Deployment timelines is kind of related. So I think there's a lot more there than just, I think it's not like a complete switch out, right? You get a new phone.
Right.
There's not a lot. It's not like, oh, well, I would get a new phone, but man, connecting to my Wi-Fi network when I get home is going to take me months.
Yeah.
That's
You can't
not an issue.
underestimate the cost to a customer. Even the most basic software products in the commercial space, and even premium models. You ask yourself, well, why isn't everybody just doing this? It's free.
Yeah.
You realize there's actually a cost to the customer. They have to take their own time. They have to figure it out. They got to get cybersecurity clearances. I mean, that's all cost to the customer, and it's sort of literal bottlenecks that distract them from making things happen.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, we could obviously talk about this for a long time, and I think everything you're saying resonates quite a bit with me. Because kind of another bigger topic, and maybe I'll leave it open-ended, but decarbonization is just a huge issue in our industry. And you could say at the top level, you have investors in real estate assets that are driving the actual operators of those assets to decarbonize. There is regulation, maybe not national regulation in America yet, but you do have SEC climate disclosure guidelines. You do have some cities like New York and Boston in particular, where they're actually kind of adding fines based on how much is the carbon emissions impact of your building. And then there's a lot of maybe more positive reinforcement. There's a great data now that a building that is LEED certified typically rents for more, has higher occupancy. So there's a lot of drivers, you could say, on just running a better business that align with decarbonization. I think on the technical side, there's a lot that goes into actually decarbonizing a building. I mean, you could argue, and I saw something maybe a week or two ago, it was from, I want to say it was a consulting firm that put out a study maybe in June, July that said most sustainability leaders spend almost all of their time on reporting, and they have no additional time or no more time to actually take action. And that was kind of the general term, but that meant, I can do my GRES report every year. I can and there's a whole host of SASB, there's science-based targets, there's a bunch of standards out there. It just becomes a lot of work. The other side, I think, is more interesting. How do we actually get to the reductions? And I'm not at all saying no one is doing that. I just think, I'd be interested in how carriers just thinking about how do we take a building currently and reduce, because you could argue, well, we're going to move to more efficient chillers. We're going to move to heat pumps in some cases. I mean, there's a lot you could offer. I just be interested in.
Yeah, so you're right. It's a multi-step problem. So step one, I think where everybody's at is, where are we, which is baselining the current state. And that's where all these dashboarding tools, reporting tools, and we're putting a lot into that ourselves to make sure those tools are simple and easy to use. The next step is, once you have the tools, where are the problems? The heat maps of where are your problem buildings, what do you do about it? And then we get into ranging from energy consulting, energy service consulting. How do you fund these projects? There's a range of funding opportunities now, from even compliance as a service, cooling as a service, traditional CapEx projects, energy, services, remote energy services, all different ways we can do it. From there, obviously getting into the solutions. Of course, now a big push is on heat pumps. From the mechanical, talking mechanically now, mechanical solutions, huge shift towards electrification. That's going on. And we have, of course, a bunch of HVAC solutions in the heat pump space.
Of course,
which brings its own host of challenges. Now the grid starts getting challenged in capacity and all of that. So it's sort of creating this macro system problem, right, that we're working towards solving.
It's interesting to see it, and I would say you could almost. What's interesting is I think you had a nuanced kind of point of just there's a lot of different pieces. The other side of it is there are certainly companies that say, oh, we do everything, and I think there's a bit of confusion. A challenge I see, or a potential challenge, is that if you're a buyer of decarbonization solutions, there's a lot of noise, is maybe not the right word, but it's actually kind of difficult to figure out what is my path, what should I be doing, what should I do next, and I think that just remains a gap.
So a classic decarbonization plan is really important, and getting people that are capable of doing those and building those is a big focus area right now. We also have to meet customers where they are. Some customers, they do want tell me what to do and let's come up with a plan together. Some customers are really, here's the spec, meet the spec, and so you have to kind of meet them where they are. And solutions along that whole continuum.
And I guess you could break that down high level. There's new buildings, there's existing buildings. The new buildings are very spec driven, right? This is my specification. There may be ways to encourage that client to go down the path of heat pumps versus a more traditional system, but maybe for some reasons they don't. And then on the existing side, and really you're touching all of that, which, to the point earlier, like those are different sales processes. Those are different approaches. Smaller companies probably can't necessarily say, oh, we're going to influence specs and go bid on specs, and we're going to go to all the new. I mean, they're probably more so saying, well, what's the vertical we want to focus on, right? Is it education and kind of the mush market? Is it commercial buildings?
I will say, the big change that happened, I noticed it really wasn't until about 3 years ago when I noticed when customers, like big clients, big multi-site and portfolio clients, we used to always have the conversation around payback on energy savings. It was really only until about 3 years ago they started asking the question about, well, carbon now is more important than just the energy dollars. And so that's really been a huge change just in the last few years.
And I think we could have even 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, the ROI discussion, I think the high level, right? The ROI was always couched in energy savings because one, you get a bill for energy, it's metered. So the bill, I mean, it's rare for people to say, oh, my bill is totally wrong. I mean, there are mistakes on utility bills, but it's typically not every month I'm being charged 3x what I'm actually using, right? It's more, had this charge, I shouldn't have been paying that charge anymore because, and getting to carbon, is obviously a little bit easy if you have the energy, because the calculations are not really complicated, especially in a building. I guess you could argue other industries, they'd be more complicated. But I've also, there were predictions or some speculation that, we need to have a wider ROI, right? Comfort, employee satisfaction. And I think that's true on one hand, but man, it's just really hard to figure out what's the savings. I mean, I even have asked, sometimes I'll do a study for a buyer and they'll say, well, what are the other kind of value streams around like time saved, which it's even that number is really hard to figure out. Does this technology solution save me time? A lot of people would admit, yeah, it does save me a lot of time. But even vendors, they have trouble saying, well, this is exactly how much time. So going from energy savings to carbon is a logical step. You maybe could argue, if we were able to more cohesively describe or holistically describe what is the real ROI, it might be easier to sell these solutions. Though there's a lot of reasons why that's a lot easier said than done.
And there'll always be skepticism too.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I used to manage at multiple places M&V tools, and as you know, M&V, the whole idea there is, well, we've done a retrofit, so moving forward, we want to compare what energy would have been with what energy is, based on weather, based on so you build a model, and there's plenty of times where an owner of a building might say, well, I don't believe my energy would have been that high. My energy consumption would have been that high. When you start unpacking that, it becomes a very difficult, it's skepticism at the end of the day. I just don't think my energy would have been that high. Well, look how hot it's been, and look at how many heating or cooling degree days there are. And like, it wouldn't have been that high.
Right.
And some of that skepticism is good. I think we should, as an industry, push ourselves to meet the skepticism and deal with it. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yep. Good.
Very interesting. I've loved being a part of this. And just before we look to wrap up, we've obviously spoken about some of the strategic plays on Carrier's side and some of the challenges that we're facing on across the industry. I don't think we need to discuss the workforce issues because we've already touched on that and probably need a 2-3 hour episode.
Yeah.
Mead, are you seeing any other gaps in the space?
I'd say there's always gaps. There's always things going on. I think I don't have I can't point to something and say, like, here's the 3 things we need to go fill the gaps on tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's why I'm always amazed when I go to events like, we'll be going to Blueprint in a couple of weeks. Right. The gaps emerge and people like start showing problems that you didn't even know existed, right? In places like that.
Yeah.
But I'd say, again, I think that the biggest one that we're dealing with, I think, in the control space in the industry is, again, this issue that Joe brought up around the data tagging, automating that truly, and coming to common data models, I think would be really vast accelerators in the industry. So I think that's kind of like the big one that people have been trying to solve that problem for a long time. Then there's a bunch of little point solution things that are very specific, but I think that's kind of the big one that's out there.
Yeah. No, I agree. And actually, you made a good comment. Mead, you'll be on a panel I'm moderating at Blueprint in 3 or 4 weeks. Nice. Lewis, you'll also be there. So that'll be a good time. I'm sure you'll meet a lot of kind of innovative startups. That's one of the places where Blueprint is really strong. A lot of the smaller companies. So I guess you mentioned Carrier Ventures. You mentioned having a lot of touch points in the market. Are there any other points that you would make to just the broader market to say, if you're working on something, or how to get in touch, or I guess what's your optimal way of keeping your eye on the innovators in the space? And is there anything you want to share here? Go ahead. Yeah.
The best way that we find is actually through customers and clients. They raise problems in their head and it's like, hey, someone talked to me or whatever. I think that's one. I think the other, just as a very practical matter, is, again, if there's real life examples and to the point where there's real case studies and real proof points, that's really critical for us. To go forward. I think we have like real data to look at and real life examples. That's huge. Up until that point, it's kind of a bunch of happy talk, and it sounds good. But that's the real thing. But at that point, I think people can reach out to me. They can reach out to their local folks, and they know how to get a hold of me, what have you. But it's as simple as that.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's great. Well, I think I really appreciate you coming on and just talking to us. It's always nice to talk through things. It'll be great to see you in person in a few weeks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity, guys. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for your time, mate.
Yeah.
Hope everyone enjoyed that one. Cheers, guys.
Take care. Bye. Have a good day.